The phone shrieked from the kitchen counter, but I didn't rush. The afternoon sun was warm on my back, and my petunias were thirsty. I was in the middle of watering when I finally picked it up. It was my daughter Brenda, and she was already screaming. "Mom, what did you do?" Her voice was thin and sharp like a shard of glass. "What did you do? The wire transfer for the yoga franchise bounced. They're giving our spot away. Todd is losing his mind. We're ruined." I took a slow breath, the familiar scent of damp soil filling my lungs. I could picture her perfectly, pacing in that sterile white apartment she loved so much, her face flushed under all that makeup. "I didn't do anything, honey," I said, my voice as calm as the garden around me. I just collected what I was owed. There was a stunned silence on the other end, a gap of pure disbelief. "Owed?" she finally sputtered. "What are you talking about? That was our investment. That was my future." "No," I said, looking out at the greenhouse I'd built with my own 2 hands, board by board. "That was my future, and you cashed it in a long time ago." That phone call felt like a sudden hurricane, but the truth is, a storm like that doesn't just appear out of nowhere. The clouds had been gathering for years. To understand how a mother ends up padlocking her own daughter's dream, you have to go back 2 months, to a sunny afternoon in my backyard that changed everything. That sunny afternoon started like any other Saturday in my Phoenix backyard. The air was dry and hot, smelling of grilled burgers and the jasmine I'd spent years training to climb the fence. The cicadas were buzzing their endless, droning song, a sound so constant you forget it's even there. My little corner of the world was my sanctuary, every plant placed with purpose, every stone path swept clean. I'd built this life with dirt under my fingernails and an ache in my back, and I was proud of it. My peace, however, was about to be interrupted. I saw their car pull up a sterile silver Tesla that looked completely alien parked next to my trusty 10-year-old Ford pickup. Brenda and her husband Todd didn't just walk into a space, they conquered it. Brenda floated onto the patio in a white linen dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, holding a bottle of kombucha like it was a holy relic. Todd followed, all perfect teeth and a watch the size of a silver dollar, already talking into his phone about leveraging assets and disrupting the market. They gave me air kisses that landed somewhere near my ears, their expensive perfumes clashing with the simple smell of my garden. "Mom, the place looks rustic." "I love it," Brenda said, which was her way of calling it old. Todd clapped me on the shoulder a little too hard. "Margaret, still playing in the dirt, I see. Good for you." We ate. They picked at the potato salad I'd made and mostly pushed their burgers around their plates. The small talk was a minefield of things I didn't understand. Podcasts, crypto, some new diet that involved only eating things that were beige. I just nodded and smiled, feeling more and more like a tourist in my own home. My hands, resting on the picnic table, looked ancient next to Brenda's, which were flawless with their professionally done gel nails. I saw her glance at my calloused knuckles and then quickly look away. There it was, that little flicker of shame. The shame of the daughter who had climbed so high she couldn't bear to look down at the ladder she'd used. Finally, after clearing the paper plates, Todd leaned forward. All business. He slid his iPad across the table, its screen glowing with charts and logos. "Margaret," he began, his voice dropping into a tone of rehearsed sincerity, "Brenda and I have an opportunity we wanted to present to you. It's the kind of thing that doesn't just change our lives, it changes the whole family tree." He launched into a slick presentation about a luxury yoga retreat franchise called Aura. He used words like synergy and monetize and holistic wellness. It was a blur of stock photos showing serene-looking people stretching on mountainsides. Brenda chimed in, her eyes wide with a practiced passion. "It's more than a business, Mom. It's a movement. We're not just selling yoga classes, we're selling a lifestyle. We're manifesting our own success, and we want you to be a part of that. We want you to have a real legacy. A real legacy." The words hung in the air between us. I looked around at my garden, at the 40-year-old mesquite tree I'd planted as a sapling, at the brick patio I'd laid myself, one blister at a time. I thought my legacy was right here, tangible and alive, but to them, if it didn't have a logo and a stock ticker symbol, it didn't count. Then came the ask. They needed $200,000 for the franchise fee. They didn't call it a loan, they called it an initial investment. My investment. The money I had meticulously saved over 40 years of running my own small landscaping business. 40 years of 5 a.m. mornings, of battling Arizona summers, of hauling bags of mulch until my muscles screamed. Every dollar in that account had a story of sweat and sacrifice attached to it. It was my security, my independence. It was the fund I kept so that I would never, ever have to be a burden on anyone, especially my daughter. I didn't say anything for a long time. I just picked up my glass of iced tea, the condensation cold against my skin. The silence made them nervous. Todd cleared his throat. "Of course it's not a gift," he said quickly. "You'll be a silent partner. We project a full return on your initial investment within 18 months. I knew his projections were as flimsy as a wildflower in a windstorm. I'd spent my life working with the earth. I knew you couldn't just project a harvest. You had to earn it. You had to plan, you had to work, you had to bleed for it. There were no shortcuts in my world. I finally looked at Brenda. "Honey, that's everything I have." "I know," she said, reaching across the table to put her soft, clean hand over my rough one. "That's what makes it so meaningful. You're planting a seed for my future, for your grandchildren's future." That's when Todd, trying to close the deal, smiled his blindingly white smile and delivered the line that would echo in my mind for weeks. He patted my hand patronizingly. "Think of it as seed money, Margaret, something you understand, but this is for a harvest you can't even imagine." The world went quiet. The buzz of the cicadas, the distant traffic, it all faded away. All I could hear was the condescension dripping from that one word, imagine. As if my mind was too small, too simple, to comprehend their grand vision. As if a woman who could coax life from the cracked, dry desert soil couldn't possibly understand the concept of growth. I pulled my hand back from under Brenda's. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. I just picked up my fork and made a neat straight line in the leftover potato salad on my plate. It was the only protest I had in me. A quiet, useless gesture that they didn't even notice. They took my silence as a yes, and the conversation quickly moved on, their victory assured. They left soon after, a whirlwind of promises and excitement, leaving me alone on the patio as the sun began to dip below the fence line. The air was getting cooler. I sat there for a long time, watching the tiki torches flicker, feeling the weight of that word, harvest. They wanted a harvest. Fine, I thought. But they seemed to have forgotten the most important rule of gardening. You reap what you sow. The thought kept turning over in my mind like a smooth stone in my pocket as I walked from the patio to my potting shed. The sun had bled out of the sky, leaving behind a bruised purple twilight. The crickets had started their nightly chorus. This shed wasn't just a place to store tools. It was my office, my sanctuary, my confessional. It smelled of peat moss, terracotta, and 40 years of honest labor. The air in here was real, not like the sterile, air-conditioned world my daughter now inhabited. Todd had his sleek iPad with its charts and projections, but this place, this was my ledger. I switched on the single bare bulb hanging from the rafters. It cast a warm yellow glow over my workbench, illuminating the neat rows of hand tools, the carefully labeled seed packets, and the stacks of clay pots. Everything in its place, everything accounted for. I went to the old gray metal filing cabinet in the corner, the kind you'd see at a garage sale, bought for $10 30 years ago, and pulled a key from the chain around my neck. The lock was stiff, but it turned with a familiar, satisfying clunk. Inside, nestled between old invoices and seed catalogs, was the book, my gardener's ledger. It wasn't fancy, just a thick leather-bound book, its cover softened and worn smooth by the touch of my hands over thousands of days. I carried it back to my workbench and sat on the old wooden stool, its legs uneven on the concrete floor. The weight of the book in my lap was comforting. It was the weight of my life. I ran my thumb over the embossed title, the gold leaf long since faded away. Opening it was like opening a time capsule. The pages crackled softly, a testament to their age. Every page was a map of my past, written in my own neat practical script. Columns for dates, clients, expenses, profits. A meticulous record of a life spent on my knees, coaxing beauty from the stubborn Arizona dirt. Johnson Residence, sod installation, $1,200. Miller account, rosebush blight, -$75. It was all there, the triumphs and the failures, the good years and the lean ones. My fingers traced the lines of ink, and memories bloomed. I saw myself, a young woman with a baby sleeping in a carrier on my back, sketching out a planting design for my very first client. I felt the sting of 100 blisters, the ache of a sunburnt neck, the quiet pride of turning a barren patch of land into something alive and beautiful. This book wasn't about money. It was about effort. It was a testament to the simple American idea that if you worked hard and kept your accounts straight, you could build something that was truly yours, something no one could take away. Or so I thought. I kept turning the pages, back into the 90s, when Brenda was just a kid and my business was finally starting to feel stable. My eyes landed on an entry from the spring of 1995. Westgate Commercial Plaza, Phase 1 landscaping. The profit log next to it was the biggest I'd ever made at the time. It had taken a month of 16-hour days. I remembered coming home long after dark, so caked in mud and exhausted I could barely climb the stairs. But beside the profit number, I'd made a small personal note in the margin. Just 2 words and an initial. Schwinn. B. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow, a sudden sharp flashback, as clear as if it were yesterday. I was standing in the living room, watching through the window. A 10-year-old Brenda was in the front yard, her face a perfect picture of pure, unadulterated joy. She was looking at a brand new bicycle. It was a shimmering blue Schwinn, complete with a white basket and glittering streamers on the handlebars. The bike she'd been dreaming about for months, the one all her friends had. I remembered the way she ran to it, the way she touched the shiny chrome as if she couldn't believe it was real. She turned and saw me in the window, and her smile was so bright it felt like it could light up the entire neighborhood. My own exhaustion, the aching muscles, the weeks of grueling work, it all just melted away in the face of that smile. That was my profit. That was the real harvest. My throat tightened. A wave of grief washed over me, so sharp it felt like a betrayal. What happened to that little girl? When did her joy get replaced by this gnawing entitlement? When did my sacrifice stop being a gift and start being an expectation? The woman who had just sat at my table, dismissing my life's work as a quaint hobby, felt like a stranger who wore my daughter's face. Todd's words came back to me. A harvest you can't even imagine. He was wrong. I could imagine it. I had lived it. I had the receipts. My sadness began to cool, hardening into something else, something solid and calm. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. I had spent my entire life nurturing things, helping them grow. But I also knew that sometimes the most important part of gardening isn't watering or feeding, it's pruning, cutting back the dead growth so the rest of the plant can survive. I closed my eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and let it out slowly. When I opened them again, my path was clear. I turned past all the old entries, past the history of sod and sprinklers and saplings, all the way to the back of the book. I found what I was looking for, a fresh, clean, unlined page. I reached for my pen, a simple, black ballpoint, nothing fancy, but it never let me down. I uncapped it with a quiet click. My hand was steady as I moved it to the page. At the top, I wrote today's date. Beneath it, I carefully wrote a new heading. The audience wouldn't see the words, just the deliberate, measured movement of the pen. An accountant making an entry. A gardener planning her season. When I was finished, I blotted the ink with a scrap of paper, just like I always did. I closed the ledger. The soft thud of the cover echoed in the small, quiet shed. It was the sound of a decision made. A debt being called in. I stood up, carried the book back to the filing cabinet, placed it inside, and turned the key. The lock clicked shut, louder this time. A final, definitive sound. My plan had been planted. Now, all I had to do was wait for it to grow. My plan had been planted. A seed, once it's in the ground, doesn't need to be fussed over. It just needs patience and the right conditions. But my daughter's generation doesn't believe in patience. They believe in instant notifications. The digital onslaught began 3 days later. My old flip phone, which I mostly used for emergencies, was replaced by a smartphone Brenda had insisted I get for my birthday. "So we can FaceTime, Mom," she'd said. We never did. Now, that sleek black rectangle of glass and metal became a tyrant in my home. It started with a text. A simple message from Brenda. "Mom, we're trying to set up the investment portal, but it needs to link to your account for verification. I just need you to download the bank's app and give me the login." I stared at the tiny words. An app. A portal. It sounded like something from a science fiction movie, not a place where you keep 40 years of sweat and savings. I'd always done my banking in person, with a teller named Maria who asked about my roses. I trusted Maria. I did not trust a portal. I ignored the text and went outside to deadhead my geraniums, the satisfying snap of the dead blooms a small comfort. But you can't ignore the digital world, it just gets louder. An hour later, the phone buzzed again. This time it was Todd. His texts were always short and clipped, like commands from a general. "Margaret, the market waits for no one. Time is money. We need to move on this. Let's get this done." The pressure was a physical thing, a tightening in my chest. That little phone on my kitchen counter started to feel like an unexploded bomb. Its constant buzzing and beeping became the new soundtrack to my life, a jarring electronic insect interrupting the familiar quiet of my home. I spent an entire afternoon trying to download their stupid app, my fingers feeling too big and clumsy for the tiny screen. I squinted, holding the phone at arm's length, then close to my nose. I must have typed my password in wrong a dozen times, each red access denied message feeling like a personal failure. It was designed to make you feel old, to make you feel stupid, to make you give up and hand the keys over to someone who knew better. The next day, Brenda called. Her voice was already frayed at the edges. "Mom, did you get the app downloaded? I don't see your account linking on my end." "I'm trying, honey. It's confusing." I heard her let out a long, theatrical sigh, the kind of sigh she'd perfected as a teenager when I'd ask her to clean her room. "Mom, it's an app. You just tap the screen. It's not rocket science. Just find the icon, tap it, and put in your details. Todd is waiting to finalize the paperwork." I didn't tell her that I'd accidentally deleted the icon twice. I didn't tell her that the bright screen gave me a headache. I just said, "I'll try again." The campaign escalated. They started sending me links to articles about the high cost of financial procrastination. Todd sent a picture of the franchise's proposed location, a sleek, glass-fronted building with the word Aura glowing in minimalist white letters. The caption read, "The future is calling, Margaret. Are you going to pick up?" Every ping from that phone felt like a little paper cut to my soul. It was a constant reminder that my pace was too slow for them, my methods were outdated, my world was irrelevant. They didn't see a person, they saw a roadblock. An inconvenient analog gatekeeper to the digital treasure they believed was rightfully theirs. My quiet life of tangible things of soil and leaves and handwritten ledgers was being invaded by their noisy world of empty pixels and urgent, meaningless deadlines. The breaking point came on a Friday morning. I was in my kitchen, my hands covered in flour, kneading dough for a loaf of sourdough. The phone rang, and I wiped my hands on my apron and answered it. It was Brenda, and this time there was no pretense of patience. "Mom, we are going to lose this opportunity. The franchise manager just called. He has another offer on the table. We have to wire the funds by Monday. I need your password. Now." "Brenda, I don't feel comfortable just giving my password over the phone." That's when she snapped. The carefully constructed mask of the serene wellness guru fell away, and I heard the voice of the spoiled child underneath. "For God's sake, it's just a password, not the key to your soul. It's for us, for our future. What is wrong with you? Do you want me to be successful or not? After everything I've done to get here, are you really going to let me fail over a stupid password?" The silence that followed was heavy with everything left unsaid. "After everything I've done for you," I thought, my hands curling into flour-dusted fists. The image of that shimmering blue Schwinn bike flashed in my mind. The cost of it logged in my ledger, paid for with an aching back and calloused hands. She had no memory of the price. She only remembered the prize. I looked at the phone in my hand. This was the moment. This was the gate I had to open for them to walk through. My plan depended on it. I had to let them believe they had won. "Okay, honey," I said, my voice suddenly calm and resigned. "Don't worry, I'll text it to you." I could hear the relief in her exhale, a little victory puff of air. "Oh, thank you, Mom. Thank you. You'll see. This is going to be the best thing for all of us." We hung up. I stood there in the quiet of my kitchen, the scent of yeast in the air. I carefully washed the dough from my hands, dried them on a clean towel, and picked up the phone. I typed out the sequence of letters and numbers, the digital key to my entire life. It felt like a surrender. It felt like a betrayal of the woman who had worked so hard for her independence. But as my thumb hovered over the send button, I caught my reflection in the phone's dark screen. My expression wasn't one of defeat. It was the calm, steady look of a gardener who knows that before you can have a harvest, you first have to let the pests into the garden. I pressed send. The trap was now set. The silence that followed was more profound than any argument could ever be. For the rest of the weekend, my phone didn't make a sound. No confirmation text from Brenda. No triumphant email from Todd. Nothing. It was as if, having gotten what they wanted, I had simply ceased to exist. They were busy. They were moving on. I was just the closed transaction, the cleared check. I didn't let the quiet unnerve me. I went about my days with a deliberate calmness. I spent Saturday pruning my rose bushes, the sharp snip of the shears a satisfying sound in the morning air. I tied up the tomato vines that were heavy with green fruit. I baked my sourdough bread, the familiar rhythm of kneading the dough a kind of meditation. I was a woman of process and patience. I understood that some things cannot be rushed, whether it's the rising of dough or the execution of a plan. The world could spin at its frantic digital pace. I would move at the speed of the earth. But on Monday morning, I knew it was time. The wire transfer, as Brenda had so frantically explained, was scheduled for today. The pests had been let into the garden, and I needed to survey the damage. I didn't rush. I made my coffee, the dark, rich smell a comfort in the early morning light. I poured it into my favorite mug, a heavy ceramic one with a small chip on the rim that my fingers knew by heart. I carried it over to the small desk in the corner of my kitchen where my old desktop computer Saturday. It was a dinosaur by Todd's standards, a big clunky tower that whirred and hummed when it woke up. It took its time, and I let it. I clicked the faded icon for the web browser. The internet connection was slow. I watched the little circle spin and spin, a tiny digital holding pattern. It gave me a moment to look around my kitchen. The sunlight streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. On the windowsill, a row of African violets bloomed in shades of deep purple. Everything was exactly as it should be. A life, built piece by piece, reflected in the simple order of a room. Finally, the bank's login page appeared. My fingers, steady and sure, typed in the username and the now compromised password. I clicked enter and took a sip of my coffee. It was still hot. The next page loaded, a blur of blue and white logos, welcome messages, and promotional offers for credit cards. I ignored it all. My eyes went to one place, and one place only. The box at the top of the page, the one that read available balance. For a moment, the numbers didn't register. They were just abstract symbols on a screen, meaningless pixels. I blinked, expecting them to change, to reconfigure themselves into the familiar, comforting figure I had spent a lifetime building. But they didn't move. 14美元22美分. $14.22. That was the official value of my life's work. The price of 40 years of 5 a.m. mornings, of sunburns and sore muscles, of invoices logged and receipts filed. The cost of 1,000 small sacrifices, of every vacation I never took, of every new truck I never bought. All of it, distilled down to less than the price of a bag of potting soil. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I didn't feel a surge of rage. What I felt was a profound and bottomless quiet, a stillness that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. The hum of the computer fan suddenly sounded like a roar. The ticking of the clock on the wall was like a hammer striking an anvil. I took another sip of coffee. It had gone cold. My gaze drifted from the screen, out the kitchen window, to my greenhouse. It was my proudest achievement, a beautiful glass and cedar structure I had designed and built myself. It was usually a vibrant jewel box, teeming with life, the lush greens of seedlings, the bright reds and yellows of flowering orchids, the deep purples of my prize-winning fuchsias. But in that moment, the sun shining through its glass panes seemed to illuminate nothing but emptiness. It looked hollow, a skeleton, a beautiful, intricate structure with all the lifeblood drained out of it. That greenhouse was my independence. It was my legacy. The money in that account was its foundation, its irrigation, the very soil that allowed it to flourish, and they had taken it. They had reached into the heart of my world and ripped out the root system, leaving behind a husk. I understood then, in that cold, silent moment, that this was more than just theft. It was an erasure. They hadn't just taken my money, they had taken my story. They had taken the narrative of the strong, self-sufficient woman who built a life on her own terms and replaced it with their own, the clueless old lady, the rustic relic, the silent partner whose only remaining purpose was to fund their glorious, modern future. I reached out and clicked the small X at the top of the browser window. The screen went blank. I took the empty coffee mug to the sink, rinsed it out and placed it carefully in the dish rack to dry. The movements were small, automatic, but they were mine. They hadn't taken that. Not yet. The pests had feasted. They had stripped the garden bare. But they had made one critical mistake. They had forgotten about the gardener. A gardener, however, never forgets about the garden, and a gardener knows that after a pest has done its damage, you don't just stand there and weep. You assess, you document, and then you act. I didn't call Brenda. I didn't call Todd. To do so would have been to play their game, to give them the satisfaction of a hysterical, emotional reaction. Instead, I finished my now cold coffee and went about my day with a quiet, methodical precision. I moved with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who has a difficult job ahead and knows that rushing leads to mistakes. I watered my plants. I pulled a few weeds that had stubbornly pushed their way through the gravel path. I was simply gathering my thoughts, letting the cold, hard fact of what they had done settle deep into my bones, not as a wound but as a foundation. That evening, after a simple dinner of soup and bread, I sat down in my favorite armchair. The house was quiet. I picked up the old tablet Brenda had given me for Christmas 2 years ago. It was slow and clunky, and the battery life was terrible. I mostly used it to look up new types of drought-resistant succulents or watch videos on how to repair a leaky sprinkler head. I opened the browser, intending to look up the forecast for the week, but the screen opened to the last page I'd visited Instagram. Brenda had insisted I create an account so I could see what she was up to. In reality, it was a one-way street. A way for her to perform her life for an audience that included her quaint, old-fashioned mother. I rarely opened it. The endless stream of perfect-looking people living perfect-looking lives just made me feel tired. But there it was, at the very top of the feed. A new post from Brenda, uploaded just a few hours ago. The photo was a masterpiece of calculated success. It was taken at some lavish, 5-star resort in Scottsdale. I could tell by the perfectly manicured saguaro cacti and the turquoise infinity pool that seemed to melt into the distant mountains. Brenda and Todd stood side by side, their arms around each other. He was wearing a crisp, white polo shirt, his smile so wide it looked painful. Brenda was glowing, dressed in an expensive-looking yoga outfit, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. They were holding up a glossy certificate between them, the logo for Aura clearly visible. In their other hands, they each held a flute of champagne, the bubbles catching the golden light of the setting Sunday. They looked like they were on top of the world, a world they had just purchased with my life savings. My thumb hovered over the screen, a tremor running through my hand. It was the public declaration that stung the most. This wasn't just a quiet family transaction, this was a spectacle, a victory lap. They weren't just taking the money, they were bragging about it. They were building their new life on the ashes of mine and calling it a sunrise. Then, my eyes fell to the caption below the photo. The words were a string of trendy, hollow phrases, each one a tiny poison dart. Secured the bag, so grateful for the family investors who believe in our vision. Time to build our empire. Number generational wealth, number girl boss, number manifest. Family investors, plural, as if I were just some anonymous member of a boardroom who had chipped in, not the single source. Not the woman whose back had ached for 40 years to accumulate that bag they had so easily secured. And that hashtag, number generational wealth. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. They had stolen a generation's worth of hard work and were rebranding it as their own brilliant accomplishment. This wasn't wealth they had built, it was wealth they had strip-mined. I tell you what, in that moment something inside me shifted. The sadness I'd felt that morning in the kitchen, that hollowed-out feeling of erasure, was burned away by a clean, white-hot clarity. The image on the screen wasn't just a picture, it was evidence. It was their signed confession, posted for the entire world to see. They were so arrogant, so sure of my weakness and my silence, that they felt no need to be discreet. They were dancing on the grave of my financial security and posting pictures of the party. I leaned back in my armchair, the tablet resting on my lap, its screen still glowing with their triumphant faces. I didn't feel anger. I felt insulted. It was the deep, profound insult of being utterly and completely underestimated. They didn't just think I was old, they thought I was stupid. They thought I was a resource to be tapped and then discarded, a finished chapter in their story. They had no idea that I was the one holding the pen. I looked from their smiling faces on the screen to my own hands, resting in my lap, my gnarled, dirt-stained, capable hands. The hands that had built a business, a home, a life. These hands knew how to work. They knew how to be patient, and they knew how to prune. With a final, decisive tap, I turned off the tablet. The screen went black, their smiling faces vanishing into the darkness. I stood up, leaving the device on the chair as if it were a piece of trash. I walked through my quiet house, past the photos of a little girl with a gap-toothed smile, and out the back door into the cool night air. I went straight to my potting shed, unlocked the door, and switched on the light. I didn't need to consult my ledger. The numbers were already burned into my memory. I knew exactly what I was owed. The time for quiet observation was over. The harvest was coming. And a good gardener knows you don't bring a spade to a legal fight. The next morning, I bypassed my shed and went straight to my truck. I didn't put on my usual work clothes. Instead, I wore the nicest blouse I owned and a pair of pressed slacks. In a sturdy canvas tote bag, I placed one item, my leather-bound ledger. It felt heavy, like a stone tablet of commandments. I drove downtown, away from the manicured lawns and gated communities, to a part of the city where the buildings were older and the streets were a little more cracked. I parked in front of a modest, single-story brick building. A simple sign in the window read, Maricopa County Community Law Clinic, Justice for All. The waiting room was small and smelled of stale coffee and old paper. The chairs were mismatched plastic, the kind you'd find in a high school cafeteria, and they squeaked every time someone moved. A young woman with tired eyes sat behind a plexiglass barrier, talking softly into a phone. I took a seat between an elderly man clutching a thick manila envelope and a young mother trying to keep her toddler from tearing pages out of a magazine. This was not a place of power lunches and synergy. This was a place for people with real problems, people who had been written off, people who needed a fighter on their side. I felt strangely at home. After a 20-minute wait, my name was called. I was led back to a tiny, cluttered office. The walls were lined with gray metal bookshelves groaning under the weight of thick legal volumes. A young man stood up from behind a desk piled high with files. He couldn't have been more than 30. He had a kind face, a slightly wrinkled shirt, and the exhausted but earnest look of someone who believes in their work but is drowning in it. "Mrs. Dawson? I'm David Chen," he said, shaking my hand. "Please have a seat. The file says this is regarding a potential financial dispute." He looked at me with a practiced, sympathetic expression. I knew what he saw. A senior citizen, probably confused, probably scammed, another sad case in a long line of them. He was already gearing up to give me the gentle, compassionate speech about how difficult these family cases can be. I decided to save him the trouble. I didn't launch into a tearful story. I didn't complain about my daughter or her husband. I simply reached into my canvas bag, took out my ledger and placed it on his desk with a soft, solid thud. The sound seemed to change the energy in the room. "Mr. Chen," I said, my voice even. "I ran a small landscaping business for 40 years. I'm not a lawyer, but I know one thing. You keep good records." He looked at the worn leather book, then back at me, his curiosity piqued. "Okay," he said slowly, pulling it closer. "What am I looking at?" "That's a complete record of my business expenses and profits," I explained. "But for the last 20 years, it's also been a personal ledger. My daughter Brenda, she's always had expensive dreams. And I've always been a soft touch." I opened the book for him, turning to a section near the back. The first time she asked for a significant amount of money was for a down payment on her first car. A used Honda Civic, $2,000. It was a lot for me back then. I gave it to her, of course. She was my daughter, but I had her sign for it. I pointed to an entry dated August 12, 2004. There, in neat columns, was the date, the amount, the purpose, car down payment, and next to it, in the familiar loopy cursive of a 20-year-old, was Brenda's signature. Below it, I had written a single sentence, "To be repaid upon request." David Chen stared at the page. He ran his finger over the entry, as if to confirm the ink was real. "You did this for every loan?" "Every single time," I said. I started turning the pages. a quiet flip 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 that was the only sound in the office. Each page told a similar story. $1,500, 25, security deposit, first apartment, signed. $500, textbooks, final semester, signed. $3,000, to clear a credit card debt, signed. Page after page, a meticulous, undeniable history of her dependency and my support. I called them gifts, I told him, looking him straight in the eye, and she was happy to think of them that way. But every time I told her the same thing, "This is just for my records, honey, so I can keep track of things." She never thought twice about it. She'd just scribble her name and run off to her next big thing. David was no longer looking at me with pity. He was looking at me with a dawning sense of awe. He leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "These aren't just records. These are simple but legally binding promissory notes, every single one of them." He began to flip through the pages more quickly now, his legal mind kicking into gear. "And with the note to be repaid upon request, you've established a clear demand for repayment. It's ironclad." I nodded. "I added it all up this morning. 20 years of gifts. After interest a very reasonable 5%, I thought it comes to $206,450. David let out a low whistle. "Almost exactly what they took from you." "They called it seed money," I said, a hint of steel in my voice. "I call it a debt, an old one, and I'm here to collect." For the first time in days, I felt the ground firm up beneath my feet. I wasn't a victim, I was a creditor. A woman with a ledger full of proof, sitting in front of a young lawyer whose eyes were now shining with the thrill of a righteous fight. The pests had celebrated their feast. They had no idea the gardener was about to present them with the bill. The pests had celebrated their feast. Back in David Chen's cluttered office, the air was thick with the smell of old books and fresh coffee. He had my ledger open on his desk, treating it with the reverence of an ancient text. He wasn't looking at me like a client anymore. He was looking at me like a collaborator. "It's not complicated, Mrs. Dawson," he said, tapping a finger on one of Brenda's signatures. "It's actually beautiful in its simplicity. We're not going to sue for emotional distress or file a complex fraud case. That takes years and a mountain of cash. We're going to do something much faster, much cleaner. We're going to file a lien." I nodded, though the word was new to me. "A lien?" "It's a legal claim," he explained, leaning forward. "A notice that says you are owed a debt, and you are putting a claim on the debtor's assets until that debt is paid. In this case, their primary asset is the $200,000 of your money currently sitting in their account. By filing this lien, we are officially putting the bank and the franchise on notice that the money isn't legally theirs to spend. It's yours." It was a gardener's solution. Not a destructive wildfire, but a simple, sturdy fence, put up to reclaim what was mine. It was a tool, practical and effective. "They won't see it coming," David continued, a glint in his eye. "They're expecting a tearful phone call. They're expecting a family argument. They are not expecting a quiet, boring, legally ironclad document to show up and freeze their entire world." He pushed a few papers across the desk toward me. "I just need your signature here and here." I picked up the pen. My hand, which had trembled with shock and grief just days before, was now perfectly steady. I signed my name Margaret Ann Dawson, the same way I had signed thousands of invoices and contracts over the years. It was a firm, no-nonsense signature. The signature of a woman who knows the value of a dollar and the weight of a promise. I left the clinic and drove home under the vast blue Arizona sky. I didn't feel giddy or triumphant. I felt balanced. Like I had just finished a long, hard day of work and set my tools back in their proper place. I had done my part. Now I had to trust the process. The next 2 days were quiet. I didn't sit by the phone. I didn't obsessively check my email. I went back to my garden. I repotted my orchids, their delicate roots clinging to the new soil. I fertilized the citrus trees. I worked until my muscles ached with a familiar, honest exhaustion. There, with my hands in the dirt, I felt centered. My garden operated on its own time. You couldn't force a bloom. You couldn't rush a root system. You provided the right conditions, and you trusted in the natural order of things. This was no different. On the third day, a Wednesday, I was weeding the petunia bed when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an email from David Chen. The subject line was just 2 words: filing confirmed. My hands were covered in dirt, so I didn't open it right away. I finished my row, meticulously pulling every last weed. I gathered my tools, cleaned them, and put them away. Only then did I go inside, wash my hands thoroughly, and sit down at my kitchen table to read the message. The email was short and professional. It confirmed that the lien for the full amount of the debt had been officially filed with the county court. Copies had been dispatched via courier to Brenda and Todd's bank and to the corporate headquarters of the Aura franchise. That was it. No fireworks, no dramatic confrontation. Just a quiet, bureaucratic maneuver, as silent and effective as a root finding a crack in concrete. I imagined the letter arriving at the bank. A legal clerk would open it, read it, and pass it up the chain. A manager would make a phone call, an account would be flagged. And somewhere, in the invisible digital world where my money was waiting to be spent, a simple, unbreakable wall would be erected. The wire transfer for the franchise fee, scheduled to go through that very afternoon, would hit that wall. It would not pass. The bank's legal department, seeing the official lien, would have no choice. They would freeze the funds. They would recall the transfer. The money would be legally sequestered until my prior, perfectly documented, 20-year-old claim was satisfied. I closed the laptop. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I walked out onto my back patio and sat in my old wicker chair, listening to the evening birds. Brenda and Todd were probably in Scottsdale, celebrating their new empire, completely oblivious. They were floating on a cloud of champagne and hashtags, never imagining that the ground beneath them had just completely given way. The payback wasn't loud. It was a silent, legal earthquake that they wouldn't feel until they tried to take their next step. And when they did, they would find nothing but air beneath their feet. And the fall, when it came, was swift. It happened around 4 o'clock that afternoon. I was in my garden, my hands deep in a bag of rich, dark compost when the phone rang. The sound was shrill in the peaceful afternoon air. I knew who it was. I wiped my hands on my jeans, took a slow, deliberate breath, and answered. The voice that hit my ear was a frantic, unrecognizable shriek. "Mom, what did you do?" It was Brenda, her voice stripped of all its calm wellness guru polish. It was the raw, panicked sound of a person in free fall. "What did you do?" "The wire transfer for the yoga franchise bounced." "The bank just called Todd. They're talking about legal holds and encumbrances. They're giving our spot away. Todd is losing his mind. We're ruined." I looked out at my garden, at the sturdy green leaves of my tomato plants reaching for the Sunday. Everything out here was so honest, so real. "I didn't do anything, honey," I said, and my own voice surprised me with its steadiness. It was the voice of a woman who was done being underestimated. I just collected what I was owed. A beat of stunned silence. I could practically hear the gears grinding in her head, unable to process what I'd said. "Owed?" she finally sputtered, the word laced with disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "That was our investment. That was my future." "No," I said, my gaze falling on the greenhouse, my greenhouse, standing solid and proud. "That was my future, and the lawyer's letter should explain everything. It's not my money, Brenda. It's the money I loaned you." "Loaned me? What loan? This is insane." "Check the ledger," I said softly, and I knew the words would hit her like a punch to the gut. "It's all in the ledger." I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down. I just ended the call. There was nothing more to say. The truth had been delivered. The consequences rippled out from there, just as David had predicted. I didn't see it happen, but I could picture it perfectly. I imagined Todd, sitting in their all-white living room, staring at his laptop screen. On a Zoom call, a man with a severe haircut and the cold, flat eyes of a corporate executioner would be speaking. Mr. Hayes, the CEO of Aura, would say, his voice dripping with icy contempt, "We have a zero-tolerance policy for financial irregularities. We are a wellness brand. The optics of a franchisee being embroiled in a legal dispute over elder financial abuse are unacceptable. Your provisional contract is terminated, effective immediately." I could see Todd's face, that slick, confident mask cracking, revealing the pale, terrified man underneath. The man who had built his entire identity on a foundation of lies and was now watching it turn to dust. Then there was Brenda. Of course she would turn to her audience. Later that night, a new video appeared on her Instagram. She was sitting on her pristine white sofa, her face puffy and tear-streaked, the picture of a wronged victim. "Hey guys," she began, her voice cracking with practiced emotion. "I'm coming on here because I believe in being authentic, and right now my life it's falling apart." She went on, weaving a vague, self-pitying story about family challenges and unexpected betrayals. But the internet is not a forgiving place. Her audience, the one she had so carefully cultivated, turned on her. The comments section, once a stream of praise and heart emojis, became a bloodbath. Guess number generational wealth meant your mom's wealth. So your vision was just stealing from your elderly mother? Number girl boss. This is what happens when you forget where you came from. Unsubscribed. Her brand, her empire, was being dismantled in real time by the very people she thought she had fooled. The public humiliation was a direct reflection of the public bragging she had engaged in just days before. The final blow was a quiet one, a piece of paper taped to the door of their trendy, overpriced apartment. An eviction notice. With their funds frozen and their franchise deal dead, they had missed their rent payment. Their carefully curated lifestyle, the minimalist furniture, the stainless steel appliances, the whole hollow facade was about to be repossessed. I didn't take any pleasure in their downfall. It brought a deep, aching sadness to my heart. But it was a sadness mixed with a hard-won peace. This wasn't revenge. It was a simple, natural correction. It was the law of the garden. You can't plant weeds and expect to harvest roses. They had sown disrespect, greed, and arrogance. And now, they were simply reaping the bitter, empty harvest they had cultivated all by themselves. A week passed. The phone stayed silent. The world outside my garden fence continued its frantic spinning, but inside, there was a quiet stillness. I had braced myself for another angry call, for accusations, for Todd showing up at my door to make a scene. But there was nothing. Just the deep, resounding silence of a battle that was truly over. I spent the time putting my house and my soul back in order. I cleaned out the gutters, a messy, satisfying job that left my hands black with old leaves. I polished the good silverware I never used. I went through old photo albums, my heart aching with a mix of love and sorrow for the gap-toothed little girl who had somehow become a stranger. I wasn't waiting for an apology. An apology would have been too easy, another quick fix for a problem that was decades deep. I was simply waiting for the dust to settle, to see what, if anything, remained standing in the wreckage. Then, one evening, as I was sitting at my kitchen table paying my monthly bills, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the quick, impatient ring of a delivery driver. It was a single, hesitant chime. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones who it was. I put down my pen, took a slow breath, and walked to the door. When I opened it, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman standing on my porch was a ghost of the daughter I knew. The sleek, confident influencer was gone. In her place was a young woman who looked lost and painfully thin. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, not a single strand artfully placed. She wore an old, oversized sweatshirt and a pair of faded jeans. Her face was pale and scrubbed clean of makeup, her eyes puffy and red-rimmed. She wasn't holding a phone or a bottle of kombucha. Her hands were just hanging empty at her sides. She looked, for the first time in a very long time, like a child. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, her shoulders slumped, a silent question in her eyes. I didn't say anything either. I just stepped back and held the door open. She walked past me into the house, her movements slow and uncertain, as if she were entering a stranger's home. I followed her as she drifted into the kitchen, the heart of our home for so many years. She stopped in the middle of the room, her gaze falling on the table. There, sitting next to my stack of bills, was my old leather ledger. I hadn't put it there for her. It was just where I had left it after calculating my own budget for the month. But in that moment, it became the third person in the room. A silent, unmovable witness. Her eyes fixed on it. I saw a flicker of understanding, a dawning horror, as if she were seeing it for the very first time. She finally understood that it wasn't just a quaint old notebook. It wasn't a diary. It was an account book, and her life was the main entry. She finally turned to look at me, her face crumpling. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "Why?" The word was a barely audible whisper, raw and broken. "Why didn't you just say no? All those times, the car, the apartment, everything, you could have just said no. Why let it get this far?" I looked at my daughter, my heart breaking for the pain she was in, but my resolve as solid as the old oak tree in the front yard. I had to make her understand. This was the most important lesson I would ever teach her. Because saying no was the easy way out, Brenda, I said, my voice quiet but firm. It would have made you angry for a day, and then you would have found another way, another person to ask. And you would have learned nothing. I walked to the table and placed my hand on the worn leather cover of the ledger, the symbol of my life's work, and hers. You needed to feel the weight of it, I continued, looking from the book to her tear-streaked face. You've spent your whole life thinking of these things as gifts. You thought you were entitled to them. You never once stopped to think about the cost. I opened the book to a random page, one filled with her loopy, youthful signature next to a list of her wants and my provisions. This isn't a record of my generosity, honey. It's a record of your choices, your debt. I let it get this far because I was hoping you would grow up. I was hoping you would eventually stand on your own 2 feet and stop seeing me as an open wallet. But you didn't. You and that husband of yours saw me as one last big score before you wrote me off completely. The truth of the words hung in the air between us, sharp and undeniable. You wanted a harvest, I said, my voice softening just a little. But you can't just show up on harvest day and take the fruit. You have to prepare the soil. You have to plant the seeds. You have to do the work. This debt, this was always yours to pay. I just finally sent you the bill. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her body seeming to fold in on itself. She stared at the open ledger, at the long, undeniable history of her own entitlement, written in her own hand. And she finally began to cry. Not the performative, self-pitying tears from her Instagram video, but the hard, ugly, cleansing sobs of someone who finally understands the depth of their own failure. I didn't rush to comfort her. I just stood there and let her cry. Sometimes, the most loving thing a mother can do is let her child feel the full, unvarnished pain of the truth. She cried for a long time at my kitchen table, her sobs echoing in the quiet house. When she was finally spent, she stood up, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and walked out the door without another word. She didn't ask for forgiveness, she didn't make any promises, and I didn't offer any false comfort. The ground between us was scorched, and we both knew that if anything was ever to grow there again, it would take a long, long time. That was the last time I saw her. The legal process took care of the rest. David Chen handled everything. The lien ensured my money was returned, transferred quietly back into my account where it belonged. Brenda and Todd, from what I heard through the neighborhood grapevine, sold their Tesla, broke their lease, and moved into a small rental apartment across town. Todd was working some commission-only sales job, and Brenda had taken down all her social media. Their empire had crumbled into a pile of debt and obscurity. I didn't track their progress. It wasn't my story to follow anymore. I had my own chapter to write. And that brings us to now, 6 months later. It's a bright Saturday morning in early spring. The air is sweet with the smell of citrus blossoms and damp earth. And my greenhouse, the one that once felt so empty and hollow, is bursting with life. But it's not just the plants. The sound is the first thing you'd notice. It's a joyful chaos of children's laughter, of little shouts of discovery, and the soft, scraping sound of tiny trowels in soil. The sunlight streams through the glass panes, illuminating a scene I never could have imagined a year ago. About a dozen kids from the neighborhood, from ages 6 to 12, are gathered around my long workbench, their faces smudged with dirt, their eyes wide with concentration. This is the Dawson Seedling Program. After the money was returned, I sat with my bank statement for a long time. The number on the page was a victory, but it felt like a hollow one. It was my security, yes, my independence. But what was it for? To sit in an account gathering dust until I was gone? Todd's cruel words came back to me. A harvest you can't even imagine. He had meant it as an insult, but it had sparked an idea. He was right. I needed a new harvest. A real one. So I took a portion of that money, my money, and I invested it. Not in a stock or a franchise, but in my own community. I bought bags of organic soil from the local nursery, hundreds of biodegradable pots, and a rainbow of heirloom seed packets. I put up a simple flyer at the local library and the community center. Learn to grow. Free Saturday gardening classes for kids. And they came. Mrs. Dawson? Is this one a weed? A little boy named Leo asks, holding up a tiny, delicate sprout with 2 round leaves. I lean over, my hands resting on the edge of the workbench. Well, let's take a look. See how the stem is a little fuzzy? And look at the shape of those leaves. That, my friend, is not a weed. That's a baby sunflower. You did it. His face breaks into a huge grin, a mix of pride and wonder. He gently places the seedling back into its pot, as if it's the most precious treasure in the world, and to him, in this moment, it is. I move down the line, helping a little girl named Maya gently tease apart the roots of a tomato plant, showing another boy how to measure the depth for a bean seed with his knuckle. We're not just planting seeds, we're planting patience, we're planting responsibility. We're teaching them that good things take time and care, that a little bit of dirt under your fingernails is a sign of a day well spent. My old leather ledger? It's on a shelf in my office now, gathering a respectable layer of dust. I don't need it anymore. Its job is done. The debts of the past have been settled. My new ledger is the life in this greenhouse. My new legacy isn't a number in a bank account. It's the look on a child's face when they see the first green shoot push its way out of the dark soil. It's the quiet confidence they gain from nurturing something and watching it thrive. This is the harvest I couldn't imagine before, not one of profit and loss, but one of purpose. I'm not just a survivor of a bitter family drama anymore. I am a gardener, in the truest sense of the word. I am taking what I have, the knowledge and the resources earned over a lifetime, and I am using it to cultivate the next generation. I am writing my own ending, and it's not a quiet, solitary one. It's loud, and it's messy, and it's full of hope. And it's a story that is entirely, completely my own. I finally understand that's what this whole painful ordeal was about. It wasn't about the money, not really. The money was just the symbol, the thing they could see and count. What they were really trying to take was my right to be the author of my own life. They saw me as a finished book, a character whose only purpose was to provide the backstory for their grand sequel. They never stopped to think that I might have a few unwritten chapters left in me. I sometimes think about Brenda. It's impossible not to. I don't feel anger anymore, just a deep, quiet ache. I see her in the face of some of the young girls who come to the seedling program, that same spark of determination in their eyes. I hope she finds her way. I hope she learns that strength isn't about building an empire on someone else's foundation, but about having the courage to till your own soil, no matter how rocky it is. The lesson I gave her was a hard one, the kind that leaves scars. But some lessons can only be learned in the aftermath of a storm. My love for her had to change. It had to stop being a soft place to land and become a firm, unmovable boundary. It was the last, most difficult thing I had to give her, the consequence. My days are full now, in a way they never were before. My wealth isn't generational in the way Todd and Brenda meant. It's not a number that can be wired or invested. My wealth is the sound of a dozen children learning the difference between a marigold and a zinnia. It's the elderly couple from down the street who now have a small plot in the community garden where they grow their own tomatoes. It's the feeling of shared purpose, of creating something beautiful and lasting with my neighbors. It's a legacy measured in sun-ripened fruit and shared knowledge, not in dollars and cents. The old leather ledger sits on a shelf in my office. I don't open it anymore. It served its purpose. It was a tool of accountability, a quiet witness to the truth. It helped me reclaim my past so I could be free to build my future. Now, my real ledger is the world outside my window. It's the new growth in the garden, the changing of the seasons, the steady, reliable rhythm of a life lived with intention. My greenhouse, once a symbol of what I had lost, is now the vibrant, thriving heart of my world. In the end, my story wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. The respect for a life's work, and the right to write your own ending. I didn't just reclaim my savings, I reclaimed my story. I learned that the most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to bury you is to remember that you are a seed. So let me ask you, what is the true worth of your life's harvest? Is it something you can count, or something you can feel? If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about justice, dignity, and the quiet strength you never see coming.